Greetings everyone, and welcome to this Future Transform recording. This session occurred on May 1st of 2025, and it was an unusual one. We like to have great conversations with our guests. We like to explore their ideas, we like to learn more about them, and we sometimes push back or criticize them or try to find other ways of thinking about the problems they raise. This time, we hosted a guest, an impressive economist, Richard Vedder, who had issued a new book where he argued for the end of colleges and universities that were performing badly. I find this disturbing, but also intriguing and emblematic of some thoughts throughout higher education and indeed in the world outside of higher education. So I invited Professor Vedder to come and speak with us, and he proved to be a very genial guest. Now, I've gotten some flack for hosting Professor Vedder because I believe people see him as too negative, or that he represents a view which is contrary to preserving academia and making academia thrive. But I disagree. The Future Transform is entirely about conversation. It is a place where people can disagree as well as agree. It's a place where people can explore ideas. And that's what we did in this hour of conversation. I'm not sure how many minds were changed by Richard Vedder's comments, but I really appreciate his engagement with us, his good faith, his ability to draw on his years and years of research in economics. So see what you think. Should some colleges and universities that are failing be allowed to fail, and would that improve higher education? Over to you. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Future Transform. I'm glad to see you all here today. We have a fascinating guest with a great provocative topic, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Dr. Vedder, it is an honor to have you, and I'm delighted to see you. I do think it's entertaining that the two of us have dueling bookshelves in the background.
Oh yeah, it is. I'm big on books.
Well, and you're a producer of a good many of them. If I could welcome to the program, and let me ask, where have we found you today geographically? Are you in Ohio?
I'm in Athens, Ohio, which is the Appalachian area, Southeast Ohio, where I am, sitting in my office at Ohio University.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we have a tradition on the forum where we ask people to introduce themselves in an unusual way. We tend to avoid the typical academic obituary style of asking for your vita. Instead, we look ahead, this is the Future Transform, and ask people what they're going to be working on for the next year. And so I'm curious, as in your new position at the Institute, what projects and what ideas are top of mind for you for the next 12 months?
Well, I'm an elderly person, and I think the funeral home directors think that they're going to be taking
Oh
control of me,
no,
but
no,
I'm trying to avoid that like the plague. Uh,
as it were.
yeah, exactly. Uh, I've been doing, as I say, I've just finished a book, and I'm thinking of starting another book. I'm academic, so what do academics do? Write books. I haven't decided yet. Some people are trying to get me to write a biography of all things. I have an interesting background because I am an academic, but I've had a lot of interaction with a broader public policy establishment, I guess you might say.
Indeed.
And therefore, I like to tell people I've drunk vodka with Putin in the Kremlin. I have had whiskey with Netanyahu in Vienna. I drank coffee with Margaret Thatcher in London. I once had wine with George Bush, although W. Bush, although he doesn't drink anymore, but with his wife at least, at his house in Dallas. So I've been around the block a few times. I've met a lot of people, and so I have quite a public policy involvement in it. With a lot of things going on, particularly in my field of higher ed these days, I might find myself heavily involved in those kind of issues over the next year, and that's what I kind of expect.
I could see that. I could see that. That's a very, very impressive resume. You and quite. I would love to hear more about that another time. Um, I'd and I hope, of course, as another academic, that you write more books. Speaking of which, I just put a link to Let Colleges Fail in the chat. So this is your new book, which I found absolutely, well, first of all, completely readable, absolutely clear, very accessible, well organized, and every chapter was provocative. Now, I don't want to summarize it without doing violence to the text itself. But if I can try, your key argument is that higher education would benefit from acting in a more business-like way, not in the sense of the corporate university, which you actually set aside a couple of points, but in the sense of being more susceptible to market forces. So reducing the amount of state and federal government support it gets, and seeing that the end of a college or university should be treated much like the end of any business. It's one that was either badly managed or failed to sufficiently bring its capacity to bear to meet market need. And if we do this, and if we take a whole bunch of other creative steps along the way, we will have a healthier and just overall better post-secondary ecosystem. How am I doing so far?
You're doing wonderful. There's a great future ahead up for you.
That is
No, you've described things pretty well, I would say. Um, the sometimes I was trying to think, could I reduce what I've written into one word? I'm always, and the word incentives is a word that there is a difference between the private business sector and the academic sector in the way we behave, the way we do better business, and what sort of pushes us to do better. And in the academic world, incentives exist. I mean, they exist everywhere, but they're not as pronounced, they're not as strong, they're not as striking as in the business world. And uh, I was at a conference in California, the Independent Institute, who I work with, put on a conference. And I said, well, we need a little more creative destruction in higher ed. I said at a meeting, I just blurted this out, stealing from a Austrian American economist named Joseph Schumpeter, who said the same thing in 1942. I said, we need to do what Schumpeter said happens in higher ed. We need to reward people who do spectacularly successful things more than we are now, but we also need to sort of punish people, I guess you might say, have negative consequences for mistakes, for failure. And we need to sort of heighten the incentive system. I guess you could put it that. I've never put it that way, but I will today. Heighten the incentive system so that everyone is on their toes more and works a little harder.
incentives. Yeah, but right now you see the incentives as being, if not perverse, but not heading in that direction.
Well, yeah, or smaller. In my book, if I don't want to bore your audience too much, but in my book, I compare the top 25 American universities with the top 25 American corporations over 2 periods of time. And what do I see? Well, how do you measure who the greatest universities are in America? That in itself is an issue. But let's take the U.S. News and World Report rankings, which are very well known, and compare the year 2000 with a couple decades later. I actually used the year 2022 when I did this. The list is the same. It hasn't changed a bit. Well, it did a little bit. University of Virginia slipped from 25 to 26, and NYU, New York University, went up from 26 to 25. Big change. Otherwise, the list of top 25 is the same. Do the same thing with the corporations, the top 25 businesses, Fortune 500 list, 2000. I did it for 2022. 19 out of the 25 corporations had changed a lot. I mean, they were different. Some of them merged. Like Exxon, I think maybe
Hmm.
merged
That's
with
when you. That's the example
Mobil.
you give in your book. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a different world. And both worlds are good. I'm not, I mean, I've been, by the way, I'm in my 60th year as a professor. So I've been around a block. I was teaching class the day John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. I was then a grad student, admittedly, but I was still teaching a class uh,
Wow.
as a grad student in 1963 at the University of Illinois. And that's what, more than 60 years ago. So I've been around the block a little bit in this field and a little bit, you gain a little perspective with the passage of time. And so I noticed striking differences between the business world and the academic world. And because being an economist, I do some consulting work. So I work sometimes with businesses and so forth.
Uh,
So I see these two different worlds as different as night and day. So why not write a book about it? That's what I did.
well, and it's quite a book, and I'm even more impressed by your career going back that far now. Friends, if you're new to the forum, I was going to ask one more question, but the rest of the hour is for all of you, and we'd love to hear your questions. And I'm saying this as a kind of formal reminder, but it's in many ways redundant because the chat is already running away with a whole bunch of questions and comments that we'd like to bring up. So I guess one of the questions I wanted to put to you, and this is one that kept coming to mind as I was going through your book, is perhaps as a third term here that we haven't addressed, which is that we have the for-profit sector, we have higher education, which is largely either public or private, with a degree of for-profits, which you mentioned admirably in your book. But there's also a third category, which is the nonprofit world. You know, the NGOs, the all kinds of nonprofits. And I'm curious, should we think about higher education not as a business, but as a nonprofit? And that makes, but nonprofits have to survive in a marketplace. They have to keep their doors open. They have to fundraise, but of all, they have to meet their missions, whatever their missions might be. And higher education is extremely mission driven. Is that a useful analogy to have?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. And there are businesses, I guess you call them, there are organizations that are sort of in the halfway world between education and something else. Call them an NGO. There are, well, just take, for example, there are these think tanks that have evolved over the years. Uh, and some of them 50 years ago, many of them more recently, that do some of the things that higher education do. They do research, they
Hmm.
do studies, they hold seminars occasionally, etc. Do some of the same things. Uh, and they are nonprofit typically. So, I mean, they are nonprofits. They're dependent utterly on outsiders for goodwill of outsiders to provide resources to make them work. So, the groups, the Brookings Institution,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
American Enterprise Institute,
New America, Cato, yeah.
Cato, Independent Institute that I'm doing some work with. All of these organizations have become sort of almost a supplement to higher ed in that they provide research, they provide teaching, they're doing all this on a non-credit basis. And no,
Hmm.
but they don't charge tuition either. They, you can, they're different. They're just different. And it's evolved in the last half century. Well, really the last century, but especially in the last half century. And I find that kind of interesting. Maybe it's if not a substitute for higher ed, it's a new form of sort of competition in a way for higher ed.
It is, in some ways. Thank you for that answer. Maybe that's something we can take up another time. I'm kind of obsessed with the nonprofit sustainability angle, but we have Richard, we have lots of questions coming in. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to relay them to you out loud. And again, friends, if you haven't had a chance to yet, the chat is a great place for you to share your ideas and your questions. And if you want to use the Q&A box, of course, that also stands ready if you like. But before I start, I just want to share the excellent Rob Aid points out in the chat that if anyone would like a review copy of the book, please email him. And there's his email address. And also, there was Richard did a C-SPAN book TV show for that. So I haven't seen that yet, Rob, but thank you for this. So let me haul out one of these questions. This is from my good friend and my excellent editor, Greg Britton at Johns Hopkins University Press. And he asks this: Isn't there a difference between a business and college? Colleges make a commitment to their faculty and their students that there is something more than a business's relationship to its shareholders. It's more than just a quest for profit, it's an educational pact that doesn't easily map to the corporate world. Now, but what do you think about that, Richard?
Well, there's several thoughts running through my aged mind, and where to begin? I almost want to say it's interesting. The question comes from someone at Johns Hopkins of all places, because John Hopkins is it's almost comical in a way. Johns Hopkins. There was a man named Johns Hopkins once who started this university, which was unusual because it was really the first great research university on the German model. And it's by far its biggest benefactor, by far, is a guy named Michael Bloomberg, who is an extremely well-known capitalist entrepreneur, but who's also sort of been in the information business. He's provided information to investors and so forth, and made a lot of money at it, and been very successful at it. So I got sort of captivated by the word Johns Hopkins before I even understood the question. And
Well,
and
the question is more about the kind of the philosophical and the structural difference and the mission difference that colleges and universities have a much closer relationship to their students. Greg called this a pact to educate them, and in the United States, not just to educate, also but to support them in many ways through residence life and so on.
yeah,
And then that's a fundamentally different type of relationship than that.
it is,
Oh,
and of course, I would point out to be a little controversial, I guess, or a little argumentative a little bit here, that if you look at a university where it spends its money, about a quarter of it goes really for instruction or activities directly related to instruction. An increasing part of universities' budgets have nothing to do with education at all. This doesn't apply to Johns Hopkins so much, but if you were talking about the University of California, Berkeley, or if you were talking about Harvard University, well, I wouldn't use Harvard. You're talking about the Big Ten universities, the University of Michigan, fine school, and it does have good academic programs. But a lot of people know it for its football team or its basketball team. And I live near Columbus, Ohio, and anytime you mention the word the University of Michigan, people sometimes want to pull out a gun and shoot you because of the rivalry between the University of Michigan and Ohio State, which has utterly nothing to do with education. It's about throwing balls. It's about ball throwing contests. We're in
and
the ball throwing business.
I appreciate that your colors of your shirt right now are blue and gold.
Oh, yeah. Do you have a connection?
Yeah, I've got 3 degrees from Michigan. In fact,
Well, my father's a graduate of the University of Michigan too, so I've always had sort of a deep fondness for the University of Michigan. I love the school. I think it's one of the great academic institutions in the United States.
it is.
Uh, Sorry to get off on that.
No, that's quite
A
right. I mean,
slight tangent there, but
But I
You know,
guess your point is that the higher education is composed of tangents, where we do have this commitment to teaching, but we also have these other functions. We have the research
yeah,
function, we have the
we have the
entertainment function.
yeah, and it's these entertainment functions and so forth that often captivate the public. If you get the public, you ask the public, well, what do you think of the University of Michigan? Someone from the state of Michigan might say, well, I'm a Spartan. I'm for Michigan
Yep.
State University.
Yep.
Uh, their universities serve a whole multitude of different dimensions, these roles these days. And it's interesting if you even go to Canada, but better yet, may perhaps go to Britain or go to the
Hmm.
continent. They
Hmm.
don't know anything about football
Yeah.
teams or
Yeah.
any of this stuff. They don't even, in most of these places, even have housing. We have enormous bureaucracies at universities, uh, feeding students, housing students, uh, entertaining students. We run these entertainment operations, and we're spending less and less of percentage wise of our effort on the job one, which is teaching and doing research, creating knowledge and discovering knowledge through research. It's becoming secondary. And there's been some crowding out of that function in the last generation or two, in my opinion. And as I say, I've been around for 60 years. I see it. When I started teaching, near a majority of us were academics in some fashion. In the university community, the employees. Now,
Hmm.
a large percentage, at most universities, a large majority of employees are doing something else. Their support activities. Some of them are needed. We need a registrar to register the students. We need people to discipline the students when they get out of hand, I suppose. We need a student affairs dimension. We've always had these to some extent, but these other dimensions have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Of course, the one that's gotten a lot of attention in recent years is this diversity, equity, and inclusion function. So these dimensions have grown extraordinarily large at a lot of schools, and they're crowding out funding for research and for teaching and for emphasis on that. And the faculty are not blameless in this. Faculty complain if they have to teach 3 courses in a semester, and that used to be fairly commonplace. And then it became loads went down because we have to write articles for, I call it the journal of last resort, some obscure journal where maybe 3 people will read the article. There's a lot of silliness, I think, going on.
Well, that's a well, thank you. First of all, Greg, thank you for the really thoughtful question, and Richard, thank you for taking us an answer in multiple directions, which is very appropriate for this. We have more questions coming in, and I'll make sure that everybody gets a chance to ask them. We have a couple from Libby Broderick and Eleanor X, and they push back on the idea of as you put in the book, of human resources not being used as effectively as they could. Libby says the folks at her institution are being worked to death. And Eleanor points out adjunct professors, which is a labor catastrophe. And I'm curious, do you think that if we embrace the free market logic of creative destruction, a la Schumpeter, do you think that that would, among other things, lead to an improved workforce situation where we wouldn't have people, as we put it, worked to death, and we wouldn't have people paid and compensated poorly, as Eleanor puts it?
Well, uh, whether people are being worked to death or not, I guess is it you know it, Eleanor's raising a valid point. There is enormous disparities within higher ed in the
Mhm.
work environment. You mentioned adjunct professors in passing. Adjunct professors are a like serfs in the Middle Ages, and look like by some. They are the class of people who have been very poorly treated because they're not part of the regular academic establishment. They're on the fringes of it. They're trying to get into the regular establishment. We traded. Part of the reason is we trained a zillion PhDs in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Every college, every professor wanted to have graduate students, and they wanted to have a PhD program, and they wanted to be what they now call an R1 institution, university, research intensive university. So we turned out lots of new PhD programs and lots of new PhDs. And so now we've graduated a lot of these, particularly in the humanities and the social sciences, I think, in the fine arts to some extent as well, and quite a few disciplines. So we have an abundance of people wanting to teach history or English literature or whatever. And so what are they to do if they can't get jobs as professors? So some of them become adjuncts, and they get paid very low wages for very large teaching. And so we've kind of created I use the serf example, the Middle Ages. I'm an economic historian by training, so I like to look at historical examples. We have the knights and the lords, the deans, the full professors, the endowed chairs, who make good money, have low teaching loads, live the good life. And then we have a group of people who are working long hours. Some of them are teaching at 2 or 3 different schools even, with 16, 20 hours a week in the classroom, which is an awful lot in the classroom. Even by secondary school standards, it's pretty high load. And they're doing this for modest amounts of money, very modest amounts of money, and little job security. So we have created an academic underclass in higher ed. I mean, we've always had it to a limited extent, but it's gotten bigger over the years. There's no doubt about that.
Well, thank you. That's I appreciate that answer, and I think maybe this is something we can return to. Friends, if you're new to the forum, we've had quite a few sessions in the past, including on adjuncts, including on adjunct unionization. So this is something which I think we can return to. We have the questions are just pouring in, Richard, and so I'm trying to pick the juiciest ones right now. Our good friend in Florida, Glenn McGee, asks this. He's Professor Vedder. In your 2023 piece for the James G. Martin Center, you propose shutting down accreditors. You say, let's de-accredit the creditors, but you fail to provide an alternative to monitoring and maintaining educational quality worthy of Title IV subsidies. What should take the place of the Higher Education Act's gatekeeping triad?
Very good question, Glenn. Actually, Glenn and I have interacted at some point or other in our long mutual careers. The one thing we could do, and I advocate doing, is we could try to have some sort of testing device. Academics are big on testing. Why don't we test, for example, I'll just give an example. Why don't we test seniors when they graduate from college? What do you know about the world? Let's give them a 3-hour general education test that what college educated people ought to know, and then have an extra hour to make it a long test on their specialty, accounting or electrical engineering, whatever the specialized area. And what do the students at the University of Michigan know on average compared with those at Ball State University in Indiana or at Oklahoma State University? How did they do on the, I'll call it the, well, you call it anything you want, the college education equivalence test or something like that? How did they do on that test? It's just like asking, what was your score on the SAT? or the ACT? Why don't we have, so we could set up, could test people on what they have picked up and learned in college. We don't do that. We're in the business of knowledge creation and discovery and discovering knowledge, and yet we don't, and creating knowledge, and yet this is a form of knowledge we don't know anything about. Do the people at the University of Michigan who graduate this year, do they know more than the people that graduated at Central Michigan University in Mount Pleasant, a much less renowned university, less than 100 miles away? Who the heck would know? I mean, the U.S. News will claim it has a rankings and others. Why don't we test the students when they graduate? We test them when they go in. We test them every semester while they're there in the classes, or every quarter or whatever. Why don't we test them when they graduate so we can see the value added by their college experience? No one does that.
Well, that would be an interesting way to get some data. I mean, the closest we have might be some of the international data from PISA,
Yeah.
or the NESI data, which is more about engagement, really.
Yeah, that's right.
No, that's a fascinating idea. Thank you. Thank you. Lisa Hinchliffe, our good friend, asks a question to come back to your point about the different functions that a university performs. She says that most people argue that all those things, sports, entertainment, etc., are universities trying to be playing in the market. If Richard sees them as anti-market, I'd like to hear what he takes as the cause of those things that are crowding out learning and research.
Well, I certainly don't think these other activities are anti-market. Indeed, they're the most market-oriented parts of universities. And the way I look at it, I use if I may use a specific university, I look at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. At least a couple of years ago, a man retired there as the head football coach. He was fabulously successful, and he was making $10 million a year when he left the job. At the time, the president of the University of Alabama, I think, was making, I don't remember precisely, 500,000 a year, 600,000 a year. So the coach of the football team, who's a subordinate to the president, made more in a month than the president did in a year. Where else in the world can a subordinate employee make 10 times as much as the boss? Well, the reason was the football team operates in a market environment. It's in a purely commercial market environment, dependent on TV revenues, dependent on football receipts, and the coach of the University of Alabama was very, very successful in bringing in lots of revenues and so forth as the head football coach. And they were making millions and millions of dollars a year. And from the success of the football teams, so they paid him $10 million. And whereas the president of the university made maybe $600,000 a year, no, not starving to death by any means, but just a pittance of the same. It's the difference between a market environment, which exists in higher ed in some areas. The chief investment officer at Yale University, at this was a few years ago, was making $3 million in salary from Yale. The president was only making one or something. But the chief executive officer at Yale was a very famous former Wall Street operator who had gone to do, and so it's amazing. Even within higher ed, you get these, maybe it's a clash of cultures or something. I don't know what it is, but it's why higher ed's so fascinating, I think.
I've heard the expression that budgets are expressions of priorities, and of value. So that those definitely express all those positions. Thank you. Thank you for this thought. We have more questions coming in. We have one from Sherry Thompson who asks a question referring demographics, which is something that you refer to in your book quite rightly. And she asks this: traditional students are becoming scarce resources. Universities have had to sell the silliness in order to stay on the marketplace. And she mentions LSU building the lazy river for just that reason. But how might things change if we see fewer and fewer students who are traditional age, 18 to 22-year-olds, and more adults? How might that change our operations, and how might that make us more market oriented?
Well, it would certainly change the nature of the university. The demographic change, we've already had some demographic changes, but the future demographic changes that we face as a nation and indeed as a planet are really extraordinary. I mean, the decline in fertility worldwide is just phenomenal. And so the university of tomorrow will be different than the university of today. And one thing is that there are not going to be as many 18 to 22-year-olds around. Uh, there's ways we in the United States could deal with that. We could have more liberal immigration, for example, to our country to help deal with this. There are ways
Mhm.
this can be dealt with, and I actually favor some of these ways. But so we are going to have more emphasis on what we now call non-traditional students. Maybe we will have more people in their 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s going to college. And if we do, we'll see a change in what the colleges emphasize. Uh, we may not need lazy rivers anymore. We may not, the colleges did go on this spree of let's make the kids happy. Let's give them a sort of a, I'll call it a country, I used to call it the country clubization of
Hmm.
college. We'll
Hmm.
have a sort of a country club environment, literally with golf courses and lazy rivers. And there's one school in North Carolina that offers valet service for their students. They can drive their car up to the front door of the classroom, get out of their car, and someone will valet park their car. I mean, maybe that, but that's changing if we start getting a bunch of 50s and 60s and 70-year-olds, or even 40 and 30-year-olds going to college. And it changes, probably changes it more in a purely academic direction. Some of these non-academic functions of universities will become less important. Universities are consumption goods as well as investment goods, to use an
Hmm.
economist
Yes.
line. We go to college partly to learn, partly to increase our earning capacity and all that sort of thing. But we also go to college to make friends, to mature, to get silly, get drunk, get high. It's sometimes in an irresponsible way, but this is part of the transition between adolescence and adulthood. If we're talking about non-adolescents, we're talking about older people, it's a different story, quite different.
Well, thank you. That's a good glimpse of where this might be taking us. We have a question from a uh, a good friend, Teal Dumsh, who can't make it today, but he gave me this question to ask. And it's a statement, and he was hoping that you would react to it. It goes like this. He says, you're correct in identifying the role of federal loans as a factor in the sky-high prices of higher education. But in my view, you're not getting at the chief culprit, which is the degree system. The loans are just gas in the flames. The flames themselves are employer degree mandates in hiring. Degrees take way too long, and employers often demand extra degrees or credential inflation. Elite colleges with powerful degrees and alumni networks can basically name their price, and people will pay it. Um, what do you think about this? Do you view credential inflation and credential demand, as well as the monopoly higher education has in credentials, as a source of these problems?
I think that's a very thoughtful uh, comment, and I happen to agree more than I disagree with it. Uh, College businesses, want to hire the best employees. And for a long time, people thought, oh, you have this piece of paper. I'll hold up a piece of paper here.
Yeah.
Pretend this is a diploma. Uh,
Yeah.
People uh, say if you have this diploma, you're a little smarter, you're a little brighter, you're a little sharper. Therefore, you're probably going to be a better employee. You're going to be more responsible. So we'll pay you more. So the piece of paper, the diploma, didn't guarantee, but enhanced the probability of high earnings. That is maybe undergoing change. And so companies putting these requirements, you got to have a bachelor's degree if you're going to do this. You got to have a master's degree for that. I even heard of bartender jobs requiring a degree. Do you have to have a degree in chemistry to make a margarita? I don't think so. But these kind of requirements, and I think there has been too much of this kind of uh, barrier put on by businesses that are not unnecessary. So I'm kind of inclined to agree with the questioner on that.
I wonder, do you think, based on the diagnoses of higher education's problems that you've given today, and also the ones that we haven't talked about that are in your book, do you think we're likely to see the post circa 2012 enrollment decline continue, especially if prices continue to be high and there are political issues around higher education, and you accurately point out that Americans' views of higher ed have been declining. Do you think we're going to keep shrinking?
Uh, it's certainly possible. There is to be a little more optimistic about it. There have been signs in the last year or two that enrollments are starting to turn around a bit. There may be a revival of interest in higher ed, that we bottomed out in terms of the declining and so forth. Some people are arguing this. I'm not so sure of that. One thing for sure, well, nothing's for sure, but one thing that almost for sure is that the 18 to 22-year-old cohort that forms the nucleus of most beginning students is continuing to decline and will for the next several years. And so that makes it difficult to get a turnaround in enrollments upwards. Doesn't make it impossible, but it makes it difficult. It means that we have to depend more on these non-traditional adult learners and so forth. And it might happen. I'm an economist. Economists are terrible predictors of the future. They love to predict the future. They do it all the time, but we're absolutely awful at it. I admit, where's the economy going to be 6 months from now? Who the heck? How do I know? I don't know. You probably know more than I do about that. But I am not terribly optimistic right now because of the demographics are contributing to this downward trend and will continue to do so for the next several years unless we bring in more bright young immigrants from other countries, which is one way we could deal with that, and it would be a solution to our higher ed problems and maybe some other demographic problems we're having as well.
But we seem to be going in the opposite direction on that score right now.
Yeah, indeed.
Um, I do have there's a question here. Thank you for that answer, by the way. And we have a question from John Lynch. And John, in the interest of time, I'm gonna have to summarize it a bit. You wrote it very eloquently, and I'm gonna have to compress it a bit. And he wonders about the difference between STEM and humanities. In that right now it seems that the market forces that do operate within higher education are voting for STEM and voting against the humanities. Humanities enrollment is dropping, humanities degrees are dropping, and when colleges not close but cut, they tend to cut the humanities disproportionately to other fields. And yet, he argues that we need these fields. He gives philosophy as an example. What do you think about this crisis of the humanities? Is this something which a greater marketization of higher education would somehow buff up and increase the humanities, or are we actually experiencing a kind of norming to what the market actually desires?
Well, I don't know for sure, but I happen to be sympathetic to that argument. I am uh, uh, an economist, so a lot of people think, oh, that means you're for whatever markets say is valuable at the moment. I think the humanities are valuable. I think we have had a crisis in the, or not a crisis, the word crisis is overused, but we have a problem in this country that people don't know enough about their past. They don't know enough about Western civilization or Eastern civilization or civilization generally. They don't know enough about the literature that has been provided the nucleus for our knowledge and our well-being in a way. They don't know who Aeschylus is or who Aristotle is in some cases. Uh, and this is a shame. And I think we have gone too far in the direction of vocationalizing higher ed and gotten away from what we used to call general education, but in courses in literature, history, philosophy, and foreign languages as well. And I am sad to see the demise of a lot of small liberal arts colleges, which is happening right now. And if that continues for a long time and in a big manner, I think our nation will be worse off for it. So I happen to be sort of a academic traditionalist in the old arts and science sense in this regards, and personally, but who knows? Am I right or not?
Well, I mean,
I
one
don't
of
know.
the arguments, and John, thank you for the great question, is that and there are a lot of arguments around this, as you know so well from your long career, I mean, is that the humanities don't present themselves as very job-oriented fields, as opposed to, say, STEM or allied health, and that it may be that what universities do is focus on the job-oriented fields, and then the humanities become a kind of service adjunct to that. But I don't want to run at my length. I'd like to get a chance to bring in some more comments from people. In the chat, Ginger Ghostman, excuse me, points out the paper ceiling idea, which I hope, Ginger, to have a session on at some point. We've had quite a few people, Richard, who see that they think that higher education is already operating in the market, and that it's a lot of its logics do follow that. And they point to adjunctification of the professoriate as a way of cutting costs. And they point to, as well, the power of investment, and also residence life as a way to attract students. Um, we have John Warner, who has a new book out. John, if you want to put a link to your book in the chat, please do. He says, we have thousands of post-secondary institutions across this country that don't bear any resemblance to country clubs. They're called community colleges. How would this creative destruction affect them? Which is a great question.
It,
Richard, if you want to tackle
oh, it's a wonderful question. And one of the criticism I would give of my own book, which is probably not a good thing to do when you're supposed to
it.
read your own book, but I will. I'm an academic and it's not going to impact my life too much either way, whether the book sells 100 copies or 100 million copies. Uh, I do think that the community colleges play an important role, and or the education that they're trying to convey is an important, doing an important job. We need vocational education that is more sophisticated than what you would get in a high school. You get almost nothing in a high school, and and the community colleges do that, and they do it uh, cheaply, relatively. They do it effectively in some cases. We do have horribly high dropout rates from community colleges. People that enter, then they drop out. But that may be the nature of the beast. There are people who go to community colleges who have full-time jobs, who have families, and so forth. The same is true, by the way, of for-profit higher education. A lot of those people are not traditional students. They're older people who have jobs and are working, going to school at night and so on. Uh, I, I think, and if I, as I say, criticize my own book, I wish I had talked a little bit more about that, because I think it is a dimension that needs to be for greater explored. We're spending an awful time talking about problems in the Ivy League, and the Ivy League does have its problems, but there in all the Ivy League schools together, there is what 100,000, 200,000 students, and in the community colleges, there's a couple million. So I think we probably do need to put a little more emphasis on that.
I agree. Well, I admire your candor in dunning your own book, and I agree with your conclusion. We've had several sessions on community colleges, who, for my money, do more for higher ed with far less than anybody. Richard, we have time for one last question, but it's a big one, and it might see us out to the end of our session. So this is a chance to get in all the high points, and this is a follow up from Greg Britton, the editor of Johns Hopkins University Press, and he asks, what would creative destruction look like in higher ed? How might this play out? I mean, we're already seeing mergers, which you support in the book. We're already seeing some closures, and we're also seeing academic program cuts. Um, what might, if higher education embraces Schumpeter, what does that look like over, say, 5 years?
Well, again, you're asking me to predict the future. And again, I will tell you economists are horrible at it. But having said that, I will do it anyway because you asked me to do it. And it's certainly an important question. I do think that there probably will be several hundred colleges go out of business, mostly by merging with other schools. They won't just totally
Hmm.
disappear. Uh, School A will merge with School B located 20 miles away, and they will form a strategic alliance of some sort. That'll be the more common way. So we'll go from 3,000 colleges maybe down to 2,500 colleges. That's quite a bit of destruction.
Hmm.
And that's more than
Hmm.
we've ever seen in higher eds. So it will seem like a lot of destruction, but it doesn't mean that higher ed is fundamentally going out of business, or does it mean that there's going to be a crisis of just a few monopolist producers of higher ed? No, 2,500 is still a lot of colleges, and it's fewer than 3,000. And it may mean that in some cases there'll be more people having to go a little further away to school than they are right now, and so on. But I think we'll survive because even even now, with all the negatives about universities in the press and everything, and in public policy and everything, still enrollments are holding up reasonably well, uh, and I expect that that will continue. And because life doesn't end at high school age, and
Hmm.
people have to do something beyond the age of 18, and they're not all going to go work at Starbucks or be home health care aides. We need highly educated, trained people in the workforce and in life. And so I'm a little more optimistic
Hmm.
about I'm sort of pessimistic in the short run, but more optimistic in the intermediate or longer run. I don't think higher ed is going to fold its tent and go away, and nor do I think it should. As I said at the beginning, I've been in higher ed for 6 decades myself, and during that period, by the way, there have been parts of that period where there have been crises. We had loyalty oaths and McCarthyism in the 50s that scared the heck out of faculty. We had Vietnam protests in the 60s and 70s, the Kent State shootings and so forth. So a lot of what we're having now in the way of protests and all this that people are excited about is just is not new to higher ed. It's been going on for some time. So I'm surprised that in spite of all the pessimism in my book and talking about creative destruction and killing off colleges and all, and some of which should happen, some of it should happen. I do think the basic operation of universities, colleges and universities, including community colleges, including technical school, is still going to continue because I think we still need to learn. We need more than a high school education to function in a modern society. So I think that's it. So
Richard, that's what a great high point to bring our hour to a close. Um, Thank you for that historic vision, and which is appropriate for an economic historian, as well as someone with such a distinguished and long career as yourself. Th Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with all of us, to answer our questions, and to think together. What's the best way for us to keep up with you and your work?
well, uh, you can email me. the start the I have a lot of email address. Vedder@ohio.edu will do it.
Very
Uh,
good.
you can do that. You can go there and maybe I talk on the phone a lot with former students, uh, people writing and so forth. I'm a retired. I don't teach any classes anymore. I have I still have one or two students. I always manage to keep a little bit in a little bit a foot in there, but I don't have many students. But I'm more than happy to talk to anyone, and also the Independent Institute. You can email me at the Independent Institute, and which is an Oakland, California organization, which I'm a senior fellow at, and they would love to work to bring us together. So
Excellent.
send an email or go on the website of the Independent Institute, and we can connect.
That sounds great. Thank you again, Richard. Thank you so much. And I look forward to following up. Um, and for everybody, thank you for your questions, your thoughts, your comments, your ideas. This has been a very, very rich hour. Before you go, let me just wrap things up by saying we have sessions coming up over the next 2 weeks. One about authenticity and teaching, about being a present professor. We have another session coming up about policing higher education and how that works. We have still more sessions coming up. If you'd like to look at those, or if you'd like to look at our previous sessions, just go to forum.futureofeducation.us. I want to thank everybody for all their contributions today. I hope everybody is well in this first day of May 2025. Please take care, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time online. Bye-bye.